Hey, what is up guys, it's Justin here, and today I've got the full comparison for you between the new Samsung Galaxy S5 and the iPhone 5S. Before I get on with this comparison, I do have a few disclaimers. Personally, I am someone who uses the iPhone and carry an Android phone as well on an everyday basis, so I don't really have a bias towards one side as to which one I use more. And secondly, I do know that the iPhone 5S came out fall of 2013, while the Samsung Galaxy S5 is Samsung's flagship for 2014. As you know, when the next generation iPhone comes out, I will be comparing these once again. So as you may know already, these two devices have quite a few differences, and they are geared towards different consumers, so my intention in this video is to go in depth and really bring out the differences that both of these devices have together while stacking them head to head, ultimately helping you decide which one would be better for you. So without further ado, let's get on with this comparison. So the first category you're going to talk about is the hardware. The Samsung Galaxy S5 has a textured plastic back that has a perforated feel to it, and it is removable, while on the iPhone 5S you've got an anodized aluminum construction that is all in one piece. Obviously, both these devices have a huge difference in terms of the screen size, therefore the S5 has an overall larger form factor. When you compare the weight, the S5 comes in at 145 grams and the iPhone 5S comes in at 112 grams, but both of them in the hand feel extremely light due to the form factor differences. On the S5, you're able to remove the back, therefore revealing your battery, a micro SD card slot, and also your SIM card slot. On the iPhone 5S, you got your nano SIM card slot on one side and internal storage that is non-upgradable. Under the hood of these two devices, you've got a quad-core Snapdragon 801 processor clocked in at 2.5 GHz and 2 GB of RAM on the S5, and on the iPhone, you've got an Apple A7 processor that is dual-core clocked in at 1.3 GHz, 1 GB of RAM, and it is a 64-bit architecture. On the Samsung Galaxy S5, you've got your micro USB port that is actually USB 3.0 compatible, and also a port cover since this device is IP67 certified to water and dust resistance. However, if you do look into it, the IP67 actually means the device is certified to go 1 meter underwater for up to 30 minutes. However, Samsung doesn't directly emphasize that. And on the iPhone 5S, you've got your reversible proprietary lightning dock connector, as well as your speaker and your headphone jack. On both of these devices, you also have the ability to unlock your device via a fingerprint, and they do work a little bit differently. On the iPhone 5S, you simply place your finger on the button and it will instantly unlock your phone. You can register up to 5 different fingerprints, while on the Samsung Galaxy S5, you kind of have to slide your finger across it and you can register up to 3 different fingerprints. And it is also worth noting that on the back of the Samsung Galaxy S5, located below the camera, you also got a heart rate sensor, but if you did check out Matt Mixing's video, it is kind of proved to be a gimmick. Now moving on to the display, there is obviously a very big difference here. The Samsung Galaxy S5 has a 5.1-inch 1920 by 1080 resolution 432 ppi display, while on the iPhone 5S you've got a 4-inch 1136 by 640 resolution 326 ppi display. And although it seems extremely small, hopefully that will change this fall when Apple finally increases the size of the display. And although there is a pretty significant difference in terms of the PPI of these displays, the eye in theory cannot distinguish past 300 PPI, but where the extra pixel density comes in is really the pop factor you will notice on the full HD displays. And speaking of that, thanks to the Super AMOLED display, you'll notice that the display colors on the Samsung Galaxy S5 are just really vibrant, saturated, and really colors just pop out, as opposed to the iPhone 5S's more natural and I'd say accurate color representation presented by the display. But I will tell you that the iPhone 5S's display, although on the paper sheet it doesn't really show it, it definitely still performs very well, and I'm perfectly fine with using it. But I think one of the more major differences to consider is the size you would prefer. Moving on to perhaps another huge difference between both these devices, and that is the software. The Samsung Galaxy S5 runs Android 4.4 KitKat with the TouchWiz UI, and the iPhone 5S runs, of course, Apple iOS 7, which this fall was just revamped, bringing in some long-awaited visual and functional changes. So first we're going to look at the Samsung Galaxy S5, and like I already mentioned, it does run Android 4.4 KitKat coated with Samsung's TouchWiz skin. And the first thing we're going to look at is the My Magazine, which is pretty much a news feed built into your home screen by swiping to the left. By going into these settings, you're able to select your different topics of interest that you may want displayed on your magazine, and also some social media networks. There's just a look at the app drawer, and that is pretty much all your apps are placed, which is quite different as iOS does not have that. Or in other words, in iOS, the home screen is pretty much like an app drawer. So going to the actual home screen of the S5 here, you can see that the interface is completely different. You have quite a bit of customizability options. You can add different widgets, rescale them, and pretty much customize your home screen exactly the way you like it. Going down to the notification pull down, you've got all of your quick toggle settings, which if you're a Samsung user before, you're definitely used to, and that allows you to quickly toggle settings on and off and adjust certain things. There's your brightness setting and your notification are displayed right below that. Going into your actual settings, you can see that Samsung has pretty much changed up the interface this time around. The nice colorful icons are something I've really come to love, and I feel that Samsung has just really simplified it and made the overall interface less intimidating, but instead a more user-friendly look to it. And you also have the option to have it displayed in list or grid view, whatever makes it easier to find your way around. On the home screen, by holding on the recent apps button, you can see there are all your recent apps. You can close them all at once and also clear up your RAM if you need to. By holding on the home button, you're taken directly to Google Now to see your cards or also quickly access some information via Google. And by holding on your back button, you're able to access your multitasking features, which allows you to run 2 applications on one screen. And if you're a user of the Note 3, you're definitely very familiar of this feature. I feel that it works very well and something that I actually like to use once in a while, and that allows you to pretty much rescale your different windows and do 2 things within one screen. Now giving you guys a really quick look at the camera app. Of course I'm going to go in more depth when I cover the camera section of this video, but on the top you have some of your quick toggle settings to switch cameras, HDR, also selective focusing mode, and you also have your settings which are displayed in a grid view. Very easy to access, and in my opinion I was able to edit and change anything I needed to very easily. You've got all your modes on the bottom, the beauty phase, panorama, shot and more, and dual camera, so that is also pretty cool. But that is pretty much it in terms of the Android and TouchWiz side of things. Obviously it is very snappy, that is to be expected, and you also have quite a bit of customizability if you haven't had noticed. In contrast, here's the iPhone 5S and iOS 7, and I feel that a lot of people, when they pick up both these devices for the first time, they will very quickly be able to decide which software interface is better for them. On iOS, of course you got everything laid out in a very tidy grid layout. You can't really add any widgets whatsoever unless you were to jailbreak, for example, but as you can see with iOS 7, they have really cleaned things up visually and also functionally, making it a much more flatter design, and at first it took some getting used to, but at this point I would say it was for the good. One of the long-awaited features with some quick toggle settings, so this is what they call Control Center, allowing you to adjust your music, some quick toggle settings, your brightness, and also access some major utilities. Moving on to the notification tab, you've got your today menu, your all menu, and also a missed menu. With the today, you've got your stocks, your weather, and stuff like that. Your notifications are normally going to be displayed there, and also a tab for your missed notifications. And also if you use the calendar quite often, the notification tab having that presented in front of you is also very handy. In the settings menu, as you expect from Apple, again, you could see a very clean and somewhat colorful look to it, very simplified. And one thing to also note is if you're a heavy iPad or Mac user who already has a lot of things synced with iCloud, for example, that is also something to consider. When it comes to customizability, of course you don't have nearly as much in terms of that compared to Android. You can obviously move your apps around and stuff like that and change your background wallpaper, but that is for the most part it. By double tapping the home button, you're taken to your recent applications, and it is in a nice card layout. That is another change that we saw on iOS 7. You're able to quickly close some applications that are running in the background. By holding on the home button, of course, with iPhone you also have Siri, and on Samsung you've got S-Voice. However, now they haven't really been trying to push that as much, but instead allow you to use Google Now. Also giving you guys a very quick look at the camera application. You can easily swipe between the different video and photo modes. Again, a very simplified layout. There really isn't too many options in terms of the camera itself, but you are given the option to turn flash on or off, HDR, and also switch between the cameras very easily, and you also have some live filters on the bottom. But aside from that, that is it for iOS. But in terms of telling you which one is better, it is actually extremely hard to do that, since both these are just such different operating systems and they definitely suit different consumers, so there isn't really a definitive answer to that question. But in simple words, Android gives you a little bit more of a sophisticated interface, while iOS tries to keep things flat and simple, and pretty much what you see is what you get. But seriously, the best thing to do is to try them out, and I'm sure you will very quickly decide which one is better for you. So next up is the camera, and of course cameras are very important on smartphones these days, as people tend to take tons of pictures with those. And I gotta tell you, the cameras on both these phones definitely excel. On the front side of both of these phones you have a 2 megapixel front facing camera, And on the back on the Samsung Galaxy S5, you've got a 16 megapixel camera that has the capability of recording 4K video. And right below the camera is your single LED flash. On the iPhone 5S, however, you have half the megapixels seen on the S5. This is an 8 megapixel camera with a f2.2 aperture and a sapphire crystal lens cover. But I will gladly tell you that the megapixels are definitely not a setback, as even till now, it is probably one of the best smartphone cameras I've tested to date. You also have what Apple calls the True Tone Dual LED Flash. So now we're going to take a closer look at the camera app of both of these devices, and as you remember from the Samsung Galaxy S4, that thing was feature packed, some of which were useful and some of which not as much. On the top you have your camera switcher to switch from your front and back facing camera. You can also do some selective focus in that mode by selecting on foreground and background objects. You can also shoot in HDR mode, which on the iPhone 5S is auto after the software update. And there, going through your settings is nicely laid out in a grid view, and in my opinion I'm actually a pretty big fan of that. And although it isn't as clean in terms of its kind of icons and everything, I definitely find it very simple to navigate and change settings that I may want to. On the right side you've got your modes, and just sliding through that you have your dual camera, your virtual tour, panorama, shot and more, beauty face. And it seems like they have cut down on quite a few of the different modes. However, you can download some more. Going into the gallery, let's just take a look at some of the things that they would allow you to edit and enhance on the image. So you do have your auto enhance there, and also some quick adjustments, tone, effect, portrait, and decoration. Adjustments being crop, rotate, and stuff like that. You can also update the contrast, saturation, and also add some cool filters to it. And also with portraits, you can remove red eye, brighten face, and stuff like that. And for decoration, you can have some fun with that, draw, label, frame, and stuff like that. And you also have your auto enhance, which a lot of times seems to raise up the brightness and the contrast of an image. On the iPhone 5S, not surprisingly, you have a very simple interface. You have your slow motion video, your video mode, photo mode, square photo mode, which I actually use a ton, and also your panoramic images. So you could slide easily between those interfaces. You have your flash control, HDR, which is left to auto after the 7.1 update, and you can very easily switch between the cameras there. You also have a couple live filters. Normally, I don't find myself using those at all, but let's just take a quick picture here and also show you guys around the gallery and see what settings that will allow you to do. So now we're just gonna hit edit there, and you're greeted with a few settings on the bottom. You can just rotate, crop, stuff like that you'd expect. You can also auto enhance the image. We also saw that on the Samsung. And you have also some filters you can add after you take the image, and I personally use fade quite a bit. You also have the standard red eye reduction and also your aspect ratio. You can crop the image to, or just crop it to whatever size you may like. So of course a simpler interface, but I find it still has everything that I need. So now taking a look at some images, I know that the Samsung Galaxy S5 takes pictures at 16:9 by default. However, I have cropped it down to 4:3 just to have it the same size as the iPhone 5S, which by the way only takes pictures in 4:3. I'm sure you will notice by now that both of these phones have some great cameras built into them, and in some cases I felt that the Samsung Galaxy S5 handled it a little bit better, and in other cases I felt that the iPhone 5S may have handled the picture a little bit better. I also noticed that the iPhone 5S took a much wider image, as these were all taken from the same distance. But really, I would say that the 16 megapixels is only handy if you're going to be cropping up your image into full size, in which you'll notice a much better detail with the extra pixels. But I would say that from these photo tests, it really comes down to personal preference as to which one you think does a better job. Moving on to the front-facing camera, you could see that the Samsung Galaxy S5 took a little bit of a flatter image, while on the iPhone 5S it handled the skin tones and the color of the wall, for example, a little bit better. Now onto the video test. Although I know the Samsung Galaxy S5 is capable of recording 4K video, for the sake of this video test and just to make it fair, I decided to record at 1080p. And you will see that both of them definitely handled it a little bit differently. In the picture of these flowers here, you'll notice that the Samsung Galaxy S5 has a more of a pink tone, while on the iPhone 5S it is a little bit more to the red side. The green also stands out slightly better in some cases on the iPhone 5S. But like with the photo test, I will tell you that it pretty much went back and forth. In some cases I felt the S5 did a better job, and in other cases I felt that the iPhone 5S handled things a little bit better. So I would say that in 1080p video, it is pretty much a toss-up. You really got to decide for yourself, but I would say that the 4K video recording capability on the S5 is definitely a big advantage and something that I would personally find myself using a lot. When it comes to battery life, I would definitely say the S5 has a pretty big advantage. It features a 2800 mAh battery, and that is compared to the iPhone 5S's 1560 mAh battery. With the S5, I was able to get it through one day at least, if not almost halfway through the second day, while on the iPhone 5S, I hate to say, I really have to carry a backup battery with me at school each day, as I pretty much can't get it past the 7 to 8 hour mark. And the smaller form factor might be the one to blame, since it probably can't fit as large of a battery as we see on the S5. Also, on the S5 you do have a removable back, which means you are able to access the battery, and you do also have the option to purchase a spare battery and swap it out very easily anytime during the day if you need to. So I would say that without a doubt the Samsung Galaxy S5 definitely wins in this category, but hopefully Apple fixes that later this year. So the reason why I always leave the benchmarks to the end is simply because a lot of people don't care about the benchmark scores, and the fact that both of these devices are running different operating systems and are different in just so many ways, the benchmark score simply doesn't give an accurate representation as to which one does really perform better. The Samsung Galaxy S5 features a 2.5 GHz quad-core Snapdragon 801 processor, while on the iPhone 5S you've got a dual-core 1.3 GHz Apple A7 processor and an M7 coprocessor. This is also running on a 64-bit architecture. But as you know, for years now, Apple hasn't really jumped into the high spec game as to quad-core processors, high gigahertz count, and even upgrade the RAM in their devices, as I found that with the iPhones, they're really software optimized, and I don't really feel that they need to, although I wouldn't mind if they did. But anyways, as you can see here, the iPhone 5S came out with a much higher single core score of 1416 compared to 949, and the Samsung Galaxy S5 in the multi-core score came out at 2925 as opposed to 2571. On the Antutu benchmark, you got a score of 29,600 on the iPhone 5S and 36,099 on the Samsung Galaxy S5. Another benchmark we ran was 3D Mark, which tests out the GPU and graphics handling of both of these devices, and the iPhone 5S came out with a score in the 14,000s and the Samsung Galaxy S5 at 18,332. But I'll definitely tell you that both of these devices were able to handle some graphic intensive games perfectly, and they will really have no problems in terms of anything you throw at it. And the last test I ran was SunSpider, which is the JavaScript benchmark for the web browsers, and I used Safari on the iPhone 5S and the Samsung pre-installed web browser on the Samsung Galaxy S5. You can see that both of them came out with extremely impressive scores in the 400 millisecond range. So now on to my final verdict, and from what you can tell, both these devices were very different from the start. You can see the form factor, the software, the build, and just so many things that these two phones differ from each other. And that being said, they're both great top-end devices. But even myself, I have a really hard time trying to decide which device is ultimately better, because simply you just can't. Both these devices obviously have their own advantages and disadvantages, but I feel that the final decision comes down to what you personally like more from using them, as without a doubt they are geared to different types of consumers. But I hope that from this comparison I was able to show you both sides in terms of every major category within these devices and help you ultimately decide which one will probably be the better option for you, and be sure to leave a comment down below as to which one you think about picking up or already have. But aside from that, I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all in the next one.